The air in Rochester, New York, in April of 2009, still carried the stubborn chill of a long winter. It was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, a damp grayness that makes the promise of sunshine and salt water feel like a distant dream. For 17-year-old Brittanee Drexel, that dream was a vibrant, sun-drenched escape named Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It was the quintessential teenage fantasy. A spring break road trip with friends, a few days of freedom from the structured world of high school and parental rules. Brittanee was a study in contrasts. To the world, she was bright, bubbly, and full of life, a talented soccer player with a competitive spark. But beneath the surface, there was a quiet vulnerability. Born with a condition called persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous, she was blind in her right eye, a fact that had required multiple surgeries and a resilience that belied her years. This small imperfection, however, did little to dim the light in her personality. She was close with her mother, Dawn, but like most teenagers, she was beginning to test the boundaries of her independence, yearning for the experiences she saw her peers embracing. The trip to Myrtle Beach became a point of contention in the Drexel household. Dawn had a premonition, a knot of unease she couldn't shake. She didn't know the other kids well, and the idea of them driving 1,000 miles south without any adult supervision filled her with a specific maternal dread. The answer was a firm no. This led to days of strained silence and whispered arguments, the classic teenage struggle between a parent's protective instinct and a child's desperate desire for freedom. Brittanee, feeling the pull of her friends and the allure of the adventure, made a fateful choice. She told her mother she was going to a friend's house for a couple of days to cool off. It was a lie of omission, a deception born not of malice, but of a teenager's fierce desire to live a normal life. On April 22nd, with a bag packed for the beach, not a local sleepover, Brittanee Drexel slipped out of her life in Rochester and headed south on Interstate 95, chasing the sun. The first few days in Myrtle Beach were a blur of teenage energy. They checked into the Bar Harbor Hotel, a typical beachfront property buzzing with the chaotic excitement of spring break. The air smelled of salt, sunscreen, and cheap beer. Music pulsed from open car windows and balconies overlooking the Atlantic. For Brittanee, it must have felt like stepping into a different world. She dutifully called her mother, telling her she was at the beach, carefully curating the details to maintain the illusion that she was just a few miles away on the shores of Lake Ontario, not 1,000 miles away in a different world. She and her friends soaked in the atmosphere, navigating the crowded sidewalks of Ocean Boulevard, the main artery of Myrtle Beach, a strip of neon-lit souvenir shops, pancake houses, and towering resort hotels. It was a world of fleeting connections and temporary friendships, a place where teenagers from across the country converged for a week of managed rebellion. Brittanee, ever connected to her life back home, was in constant contact with her long-term boyfriend, John Greco, who had stayed behind in Rochester for work. Their relationship was a digital tapestry of texts and calls, a constant stream of I miss yous and what are you doings that bridged the physical distance between them. This digital tether was her anchor to the familiar, a thread back to the life she had temporarily left behind. On the evening of April 25th, the illusion of a perfect spring break began to fray. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, but a different kind of darkness was gathering. Around 8 p.m., Brittanee left her friends at the Bar Harbor Hotel. She was on a simple mission: to walk the 1.5 miles down the bustling Ocean Boulevard to another hotel, the Blue Water Resort. A friend from her hometown, Peter Brozowitz, was staying there, and she planned to drop by for a quick visit. The walk itself was unremarkable, a journey she would have shared with hundreds of other spring breakers milling about in the warm coastal air. The sounds of laughter and music would have filled the night, the salty breeze a constant companion. Security cameras at the Blue Water Resort captured her arrival, a grainy but crucial piece of evidence. She was wearing a black and white tank top, shorts, and flip-flops, her beige purse slung over her shoulder. The footage shows a young woman moving with purpose, just another face in the vibrant, transient crowd. Inside, she met up with her friend, and the visit was brief. By 8:45 p.m., she was walking out of the hotel lobby, back into the electric night of Myrtle Beach. As she began her walk back to the Bar Harbor Hotel, she pulled out her phone, her lifeline to John. A flurry of text messages crossed the 1,000 miles between the neon-lit boulevard and the quiet streets of Rochester. She told him she was heading back to her friends, that she was tired, that she loved him. John, sensing a shift in her tone, a weariness that went beyond a long day at the beach, felt a pang of concern. He texted back, his messages filled with affection and a hint of worry. Then, at 9:15 p.m., the conversation abruptly stopped. One moment, Brittanee was there, a presence on the other end of the line, her words lighting up his screen. The next, there was only silence. John's follow-up texts went unanswered. His calls went straight to voicemail. The digital thread that had connected them snapped. Panic began to set in. He started calling her friends in Myrtle Beach, his voice tight with an anxiety he couldn't explain. Had they seen her? Was she with them? The answer, again and again, was no. No one had seen her. The vibrant, noisy backdrop of Myrtle Beach had, in an instant, swallowed Brittanee Drexel whole. The sun had set on her spring break, and a long, terrifying night was just beginning. The morning of April 26th dawned bright and clear over Myrtle Beach. The cheerful sunlight, a cruel contrast to the growing panic among Brittanee Drexel's friends and her boyfriend 1,000 miles away. The initial hope that she had simply lost her phone or fallen asleep on a friend's floor quickly evaporated with the morning mist. Her friends, now realizing the gravity of the situation, contacted the Myrtle Beach Police Department. An officer was dispatched to the Bar Harbor Hotel, and a formal investigation into the disappearance of Brittanee Drexel began. The hotel room was the first stop. It was a time capsule of a vacation cut short. Her clothes were still packed in her luggage, a silent testament to her intention to return home. But her purse and her cell phone, the two items she would have carried on her short walk down the boulevard, were gone. The absence of these items painted a grim picture. This wasn't a case of a teenager running away. She had left everything behind. The police immediately began to piece together her last known movements, a process that felt like chasing a ghost through the crowded landscape of a resort town. The security camera footage from the Blue Water Resort was the cornerstone of the early investigation. Detectives watched the grainy images over and over, analyzing her posture, her expression, her interactions. The footage confirmed the timeline her friends had provided. She arrived, she visited with Peter Brozowitz, and she left at 8:45 p.m. Brozowitz and the other friends she visited were questioned extensively. Their stories were consistent. She had stopped by, but she hadn't stayed long. They described her as being in good spirits, just a normal teenager on a normal night of spring break. There were no signs of distress, no indication of any impending danger. She had simply walked out of the hotel and vanished into the night. The focus of the investigation then shifted to the most crucial piece of missing evidence, her cell phone. In 2009, smartphone technology was not as ubiquitous as it is today, but the ability to track a phone's general location through network pings was a vital tool for law enforcement. Technicians from her service provider began to work with police, tracing the digital breadcrumbs her phone had left behind. The data that came back was both baffling and terrifying. The pings showed that shortly after 9:15 p.m., the moment she stopped texting her boyfriend, her phone began to travel south, away from Myrtle Beach. It moved at a speed that indicated it was in a vehicle, heading down U.S. Route 17. The signal continued for another 50 to 60 miles, deep into the marshy, rural landscape of Georgetown County, an area of dense woods and winding waterways, a stark contrast to the neon glow of the beach. Then, in the early hours of April 26th, the ping stopped abruptly. The phone was either turned off, destroyed, or its battery had died. This information transformed the case from a simple missing persons report into a suspected abduction. The walk back to her hotel should have taken her north, not south. She was in a vehicle, moving away from everyone she knew, into a dark, unfamiliar territory. The search for Brittanee Drexel now had a new sprawling epicenter. For the next 11 days, law enforcement, search and rescue teams, and volunteers scoured the swamps and forests of Georgetown County. They waded through alligator-infested waters, hacked through dense undergrowth, and searched abandoned properties, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of what they might find. Dawn Drexel, Brittanee's mother, had driven through the night from Rochester, a frantic, tear-filled journey fueled by a mother's worst fear. She arrived in Myrtle Beach to a living nightmare, her daughter's face now plastered on missing person flyers up and down the very boulevard she had last been seen on. Dawn's temporary visit would stretch into weeks, then months, then years. She would eventually relocate to the area permanently, a mother unable to leave the last place her child had been seen alive, a constant heartbreaking vigil for a ghost. The years that followed were a torturous limbo for the Drexel family. The initial flurry of media attention faded. The national news crews packed up and left, but for Dawn, the search never ended. The case went cold, a thick file of dead-end leads and unsubstantiated tips. The hope of finding Brittanee alive dwindled with each passing year, replaced by a desperate need for answers, for justice. The investigation, however, was not dormant. Behind the scenes, detectives and FBI agents continued to work the case, re-interviewing witnesses, re-examining evidence, and chasing down every whisper and rumor. Myrtle Beach, with its transient population and party atmosphere, was a difficult place to investigate. People came and went, memories faded, and stories changed. But the investigators were relentless. Then, in 2016, 7 long years after Brittanee vanished, the FBI held a press conference that sent a shockwave through the community. They announced that they were now officially classifying the case as a homicide. They believed Brittanee had been abducted from Myrtle Beach, taken to the Georgetown area, and killed shortly after her disappearance. This grim announcement was based on new information. A jailhouse informant who had come forward with a horrific story. The informant, a man named Taquan Brown, who was serving a 25-year sentence for manslaughter, provided a detailed and gruesome narrative. He claimed that in the days following Brittanee's disappearance, he had gone to a stash house in McClellanville, a small town within the search area of Georgetown County. There, he said, he witnessed a group of men, including a local man named Timothy Deshawn Taylor, sexually assaulting Brittanee. Brown claimed that Brittanee had managed to escape and run from the house, but was quickly recaptured. He then heard 2 gunshots and saw her body, wrapped in a sheet, being removed from the house. He alleged that her body was then dumped in one of the many alligator-infested swamps in the area. This story, as horrific as it was, provided the first concrete theory of what might have happened. The FBI, acting on this information, named Timothy Deshawn Taylor as a person of interest. They publicly declared that he was involved in the kidnapping and murder of Brittanee Drexel. This accusation turned Taylor's life upside down. He and his family vehemently denied any involvement, stating that he was a victim of a jailhouse rumor mill, a pawn in a game being played by an inmate looking for a reduced sentence. The FBI searched the alleged stash house and the surrounding alligator ponds, but found no physical evidence, no trace of Brittanee Drexel. The case, which had seemed on the verge of a breakthrough, once again stalled, leaving a family in agony and a cloud of suspicion hanging over a young man who maintained his innocence. The path to the truth, it seemed, was still shrouded in darkness. The public naming of Timothy Deshawn Taylor as a person of interest created a media firestorm that led to an investigative brick wall. Despite the FBI's confidence, the sensational claims of the jailhouse informant, Taquan Brown, could not be substantiated with physical evidence. Searches of the alleged stash house and the murky alligator ponds of McClellanville yielded nothing. For Taylor and his family, it was the beginning of a years-long nightmare. living under the shadow of a horrific crime he insisted he did not commit. He was tried and convicted on an unrelated federal charge that prosecutors admitted was a way to exert pressure on him to cooperate in the Drexel case. Yet, he never wavered from his story. He had nothing to do with it. The Drexel case, once again, grew cold. The promising lead had dissolved into a frustrating dead end, another false dawn for a family desperate for closure. The years continued to tick by. 2017 became 2018, then 2019. Dawn Drexel remained a fixture in the Myrtle Beach community, a tireless advocate for her daughter, her face etched with a grief that never subsided. She organized vigils, gave interviews, and worked with law enforcement, ensuring that Brittanee's name was never forgotten. The world moved on, but for Dawn, time had stopped on April 25, 2009. Behind the scenes, however, a quiet revolution was taking place. A new team of investigators, armed with more advanced technology, decided to take a fresh look at the case from the very beginning. They returned to the most critical piece of evidence from that first night, the cell phone data. In 2009, the technology could only place Brittanee's phone within a general area. But now, over a decade later, forensic technology had evolved exponentially. Analysts could re-examine the raw data and pinpoint the phone's location and movement with astonishing precision. They focused on that crucial moment, just after 9:15 p.m., when Brittanee's phone went from moving at a walking pace to the speed of a vehicle. By cross-referencing this exact timestamp with traffic and security, camera footage from Ocean Boulevard footage that had been preserved for years, they could narrow down the dozens of cars seen that night to a select few. The new analysis led them to a single vehicle, a specific teal-green Chevrolet, Monte Carlo. This was a monumental breakthrough. They now had a potential crime scene, a needle plucked from a haystack of a decade's worth of data. The next step was to identify the owner of that car. The vehicle was registered to a man named Raymond Moody, a 62-year-old registered sex offender who had been living in the Georgetown area in 2009. His name was not new to the investigation. In fact, he had been identified as a person of interest as far back as 2012. Moody had an extensive and disturbing criminal history, including a conviction for raping an 8-year-old girl in California, for which he had served 20 years in prison. His girlfriend at the time, Angel Voss, had even come to police in 2011, telling them that Moody had been with a young woman matching Brittanee's description on the night she disappeared. She claimed she had left them alone for a period of time and had grown suspicious of his story about what happened afterward. Investigators had questioned Moody back then, but without concrete evidence linking him directly to Brittanee, they were unable to make an arrest. Now, armed with the new cell phone data that placed Brittanee squarely in his vehicle, investigators had the leverage they needed. The focus of the entire investigation shifted from Timothy Taylor to Raymond Moody. The false lead that had consumed years of resources and public attention was finally set aside, and the detectives closed in on their new and final suspect. In May of 2022, 13 years after Brittanee Drexel vanished, law enforcement made their move. They arrested Raymond Moody and charged him with murder, kidnapping, and criminal sexual conduct. The arrest was a stunning development, a sudden resolution to a case many had given up on. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. Faced with the overwhelming technological evidence against him, Raymond Moody confessed. He told investigators the entire story of that horrific night. He admitted to luring Brittanee into his car on Ocean Boulevard. He then drove her 35 miles south to a secluded campsite in Georgetown County. There, he sexually assaulted her and then strangled her to death. The next day, he buried her body in a wooded area not far from the campsite. It was a confession of pure, opportunistic evil, a random act of violence that had stolen a young life and plunged a family into a decade of unknowing torment. As part of a plea deal, Moody agreed to lead investigators to Brittanee's remains. On May 11, 2022, investigators followed his directions to a dense wooded area in Georgetown. There, buried in a shallow grave, they found the skeletal remains of Brittanee Drexel. After 13 years of searching, Brittanee was finally coming home. The discovery was confirmed through dental records and DNA analysis. The long, agonizing wait for the Drexel family was over, but their grief was now fresh and raw all over again. On October 19, 2022, Raymond Moody appeared in a Georgetown County courtroom to face his sentencing. The man who had lived free for 13 years after committing a monstrous crime now stood before the family he had shattered. In court, he cried, calling himself a monster. He offered an apology, words that rang hollow in the face of such profound loss. Dawn Drexel, who had worn her daughter's picture around her neck every day for 13 years, finally had the chance to confront the man who had taken everything from her. She spoke of the years of torture, the endless nights of wondering, the pain of not knowing. She spoke of Brittanee's bright future, the life she would never get to live. Chad Drexel, Brittanee's father, also spoke, his voice thick with emotion, describing his daughter's strength and the family's unending nightmare. The judge, after hearing the gut-wrenching impact statements, sentenced Raymond Moody to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, after a long and painful journey, had finally been served. The case of Brittanee Drexel was officially closed, not with the sensational tale of a gang-related murder in a stash house, but with the quiet, brutal reality of a lone predator who saw an opportunity and seized it. The sun had finally set on the 13-year investigation, bringing with it the cold comfort of truth and the enduring pain of a life cut tragically short.